Kumar Saurabh, co-founder and CEO of AirMDR, and I'm looking forward to discussing today with Nick Muy, who is CISO at Scrut Automation. One of the topics that actually is very intriguing and I'm always curious about is how do CISOs at a smaller companies, 100-person to 1,000-person companies, or a little bit bigger even, make sure that the enterprise is secure when they don't have the size of the team or necessarily the funding that many of the larger companies and larger security teams do. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. And what I want to do is hand it off to Nick to briefly introduce himself and a little bit about his experience, and then we'll dive into the techniques and tips and tricks that he has followed over the years to secure a relatively smaller but a growing startup like Scrut Automation. So Nick, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll dive into a little bit of questions after that.
Sounds good. Great to be here, Kumar, and Nick Muy. And as Kumar mentioned, CISO for Scrut Automation, and previously had led security teams both in other startups at kind of the early stages up to Series A, and also in Fortune 500 when I was at Expedia Group. So I've kind of seen it from both ends of the spectrum. I've been in cybersecurity for a long time, both on the technical side and security engineering, operations, product management, as well as on the policy side, working on policy initiatives in DC, like NIST cybersecurity framework in the past. So
Awesome.
looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Nick, thanks for joining. One of the things, like as we have talked, one thing that I find super interesting about your background, that you spent some time at Expedia. It's a pretty large, well-known company, much larger SOX, right? And almost the complete opposite of going to Scrut Automation, almost is starting from 0 to 1 and thinking about security. One thing that I'm very curious is at some point when you joined the company, they probably didn't have a very mature detection and response program. What were the key drivers that forced you to start thinking about, okay, we need to up-level our detection and response posture?
Yeah, no, great question. And it is very different, having come from kind of a big organization with a 24/7 in-house SOC, and really, I think it's been good, I think, to have to see it from the other side and kind of going from 0 to 1. For us, and for me, the trigger really is as we start to see our customer base grow, and for the business that we're in, I think it's really seeing like, hey, we're growing the number of customers to a scale where it makes sense now, given just how many contractual obligations we have to our customers. And it is the right thing to do to make sure that we're protecting their data in many different ways, not just in how we build the application, but how we run our operations. Um, the question I had, and that I kind of facilitated for our leadership team, was, does it make sense for us to grow this as an in-house capability? Is it strategic for us? Or should we look at, are there other ways for us to kind of scale this? But either way, it seemed like the risk that we are trying to manage for in terms of protecting our customer data, it was important to actually, let's look at who could we partner with, who we could kind of mature in this together. Someone who provides, I think, the kind of right capabilities to do that.
Awesome. Nick, one of the questions that I have is, when you're thinking about engaging an MDR, where's some steps that you thought, okay, these are the prerequisite steps that we have to do before we engage with an MDR, before we can get value out of partnering with an MDR?
Yeah, no, there are definitely steps I think everyone should kind of make sure they consider. Aside from, once you've decided partnering is going to be a good way to go about it, I think then take a step back, make sure internally that you've determined, hey, what are the things we're actually going to go have a partner help us monitor and do detection or response on? Um, I think you could just one option is like you could just give them everything, whatever that means, quote unquote. Sometimes that maybe that works, but I think a lot of times it's important to actually start very explicitly determining what are the most important kind of platforms, infrastructure, services, or types of assets that you need monitored. And maybe you start with that and then you kind of add on. But I think making sure you know what those sources are, you know what you want to do about it, and you know why you want to monitor it. I think the most value you can get, and from partnering with someone will come from having a very clear understanding yourself internally as a company on like we want our desktops to be monitored because that's a key part of our workforces. They use laptops, they travel, they work remotely. We need to make sure that we monitor what is happening there and that we have a partner who can help us do that 24/7 to help us scale.
That's very interesting in terms of knowing what you want the MDR to monitor for you, what sources you want them to monitor, what are they looking for, and the level of interaction you want to have with the MDR provider. Everybody, different people in your organization, I'm sure, look at the value or the reason why you're doing an MDR differently. For example, your CEO or the board itself, right? What do they expect from you as cybersecurity, as a cybersecurity leader, but maybe focusing a little bit on how does the detection response piece play a part in delivering on those expectations the business or the CEO or the board has of you?
Yeah, totally. Right. I would say transparently, like from the board and CEO's perspective, generally speaking, and not in, and there's variation depending on the kind of particular leader that you're working with. It is all going to come down to kind of financial management. And as someone who leads a security function for a company, the expectation is, are you fiscally responsible in terms of how you want to um, build your security function, whether it's hiring in-house FTEs, whether it's partnering for some services. And from their perspective, if you've made the determination, you say, hey, it looks like it makes sense for us to do this way. We can scale this function at the stage that we're at for the number of assets, devices, log sources, whatever the kind of metric is, and make sure you know what that metric is. I think it just don't kind of run headfirst into it without having that defined. Then I think, kind of you're making the business case. It basically says like, look, we can monitor these things in at this scale, with 24/7 coverage in a way that it would be quite difficult for us to build even a basic team to go do that. Um, unless there is, I would say, and there are exceptions, you could be in a business where your customers, specifically if you're in a B2B business, for example, have some kind of contractual expectation that you yourself will staff a 24/7 team. But outside of that, I think that's kind of what they're looking at. They're like, is security a cost effective for the proportionate to the size that we're at, just like they would look at marketing spend.
Right. Out of curiosity, did you even like was the financials of doing it in-house versus using an MDR, were they even close enough that you did an analysis or it was intuitively clear to you? I'm curious about your thought process because you have experience with the in-house SOC and
Yeah.
MDR, and was that close? How did you think about that? Or was it fairly obvious that, hey, at this particular stage, running an in-house SOC does not make a whole lot of financial sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. Fortunately, I had the math already done from back when my Expedia days in my old job, and we had looked at many different options, both in terms of fully kind of scaling detection and response with a partner, using a partner just to expand our coverage and capacity, and continuing to maintain it in-house. And at the time when I was there, and also running the team. We had a fully in-house 24/7 SOC across 3 locations. So I knew the math really well. And I mean, it doesn't come close.
Uh,
Um, I think, but it is proportionate, right? And the numbers are just kind of very different. And I think a lot of it is, as a security leader, make sure you know your business. There's a lot of things that work for other people. Um, and there are some things that you and other people might share in common. Make sure you know what those are and that
yeah.
they're relevant. Uh, you could be a big business with lots of employees and lots of endpoints, and you need that monitored. And even if you're big, it may make sense to partner versus, it's not perfect kind of there's not like a one size fits all rule per se. You really have to look at what are you trying to protect.
Yep. So when you start using an MDR, what do you expect yourself to get from the MDR at your level as a CISO? And the other part of that question is, what are the different touch points with other people in your organization and the MDR? What does that interaction between you and the MDR, other people in the MDR look like?
Yeah, yeah. So as a CISO, for me, I expect it's similar to what I would expect of the team internally, kind of transparency on the metrics for like, I want to know, were the sources that we're monitoring are being monitored. There's transparency on how long it takes to triage, investigate, how long it takes to contain, remediate as necessary. And that may include there are some people that some part of that process which is on us versus on who we're partnering with. Either way, I think having that visibility and given our size, it changes as you grow. I think for bigger company CISOs, your touch point may be a QBR, an MBR with your vendor, a monthly business review, a quarterly business review. They give you an update. And I used to have hosts of those with our different kind of big vendors and partners at Expedia. At a smaller company, my expectation is actually that I can self-serve that information on demand or have the company that we're partnered with push that information to me on whatever schedule or frequency I need it. And I think that is more important than spending more time in meetings. The touch points with the people in my team, there it's there's actually, I think a good partner is one that can, I mean, I think it varies with your level of comfort. And so for us, as an example, my expectation is that the the DevOps team, the kind of IT team, these resources have a direct channel, a shared channel with the company that we're partnered with so that they can interface directly in terms of um, especially in the early days when you are getting this up and running, you're partnered with someone and you guys are learning kind of how they work and how you work. Because there's a people component, obviously. There's not
Yep.
purely just um, kind of faceless technology in that sense because the people can very quickly provide feedback from our team to our partner, and then the partner can take that into account in their processes. And then, I think that just keeps things running well. But also for me, I don't ever want anyone to hesitate to communicate information with each other, especially for a function like detection and response where time matters.
Yeah, absolutely. There is always going to be, both on the context side of things, there will be members on your team that no matter how closely tied the MDR is with your organization, there is contextual information that they have that the MDR will probably not have and becomes critical. Do I take this particular action depending on, like, for example, if you're resetting a password on an account or you're blocking some IP address, right? You want to make sure with the company, with the security team, that that action will not have unintentional consequences. One of the questions that I want to follow up, right, when you're thinking about this, um, when people are looking at MDR, I have seen in the past a couple of other factors come into play. Cyber insurance being one, compliance being another one, right? where any of these two things come into play when you're thinking about like what to do detection response, or was any of those factors driving the adoption of an MDR?
Good question. I wonder if it's, I guess for me personally, those are definitely important factors. And if you have external compliance requirements, you just kind of have to deal with it. And if your cyber insurance policies, some of them have pretty specific requirements for them to underwrite a policy for you. Um, and in the early days, 10 years ago, they might send you a Word document with 5 things. They said, you have to do this. Your password characters have to be this much. You have to have X, Y, and Z. Um, it's kind of like to give you home insurance, you have to have locks on your doors or something. And I think the lists have gotten longer over the years, and I think it's important that you look at those. For ours, there wasn't an explicit requirement necessarily driving MDR per se from cyber insurance. I think it's kind of implied in some of the contractual language about us making sure that we take the appropriate measures
Yeah.
uh, so that they, will underwrite us and that our claims would be valid if we needed to make them. It's not primary for me. It's not bad if it is primary for someone else, I think, because that's just part of doing business. Just like
Yep.
someone wants to expand into a new market, they need to go look at what licenses they need to get for that. And from a security perspective, I think there's this. I don't like it when people say, "Oh, it's a compliance requirement, it's bad," or "this is compliance." And these things are not at odds with each other, right? Look, if it's there, it's just there. You just have to do it. I mean, that's it. It doesn't have to be kind of a big deal, but I think it's just important to kind of manage, especially if
Yeah.
you want to be there for a while.
At the end of the day, it seems like, more than compliance and insurance, it's like the customer's trust, right? And you're taking you as a, can you talk a little bit about like if it is not compliance, if it is not cyber insurance, what is the impact of, like, let's
Yeah.
say, devil's advocate? Someone goes and says, okay, we're a small company, we can, we have been doing without an MDR partner for the last 1 year. Why not do nothing for the next 1 year? At some point, there was something untenable about not doing anything for the last year, for the next 1 year. So what would be one or two, like if, what were one or two things that you worry about if you didn't have an MDR, or if you don't have an MDR that you can rely on, that is of high quality, that you worry about in terms of the impact that you primarily worry about?
Yeah, no, and if you think back to earlier part of our conversation on the triggers, and for me it was as we're looking at kind of the number of customers and how that number is growing, the size, scope, and geography of where these customers are as that grows. And for me, that was kind of a big driver where it's like, look, I think we're at a stage in maturity now where it's important to have this kind of function. Because I think our customers' expectation is that we have a sufficient program in place. It totally makes sense. Like, look, if you're at a very early stage and you're just kind of figuring things out, I know a lot of startups that I've spoken with, they'll tell their customers, like, we do what we can for the size that we're at. This is not unusual thing to hear from people. But at some point, you determine and you can get feedback, and you should be staying on top of your kind of the go-to-market updates from your colleagues in sales and marketing and the CEO.
Right.
If you're not already kind of well aware of that, it would behoove you to, as the CISO, as the head of security, as a head of, kind of whatever it is, whatever the title, um, because the customer trust, I mean, for me, as a B2B business, that is part of our risk model. Like, what are we worried about? Our customers have expectations of us, both intangible and tangible. The tangible expectations are codified into contracts. And so our
Right.
contracts spell out expectations from our customers, and those are obligations. But there are intangible ones too. They just expect that who they are working with is taking the sufficient steps to protect their data. And for me, it's very personal since I got into security long, long ago. Not because I thought anyone else thought anything of it. It was just interesting for me personally and something I cared about. And I think protecting the customer's data is just as important because I am a customer for a lot of other people. I'm a
Right.
customer for many different vendors, and I expect them to protect my data. And so
Yep.
I think it is just merely trying to return the favor. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
So one quick follow-up on that. I understand both the proactive nature of it and the implied expectation of it. What I'm curious about it was, did it happen in where it became explicit requirement? And if it became explicit, what was the format like? Was one of the contractual requirements 24/7 monitoring, for example? I, I'm throwing that
Mm,
example of
yeah,
what might be an explicit requirement that you cannot check off without actually either having an in-house SOC or in-house detection response team or using a partner. I'm looking for one or two nuggets where it's not just proactive, it's not just best practices, it's not just what's expected of it, but you contractually cannot bring on new
yeah,
customers unless and until you have it because the contract says XYZ. Were there
yeah.
examples like that?
So if you're leading security for a business that is especially the B2B space and your customers are financial services,
Right.
banks, insurance companies, healthcare organizations, it's not uncommon to see requirements that get more explicit, that get more verbose. They detail them out. They don't make them vague. They're very specific about what the vendor should be doing or not doing.
Right.
Sometimes it's implied through their vendor risk assessment. As you go through the assessment, they have very specific questions in addition to whatever template from the industry that they're using. And those questions aren't really questions. They are a list looking to
Right.
see if do you have a 24/7 monitoring capability, however you fulfill that partner in-house, whatever. Do you have X, Y, and Z? Do you have the resources to respond to something?
Right.
And at minimum, I'm pretty sure every single contract will have a reporting requirement where they will say, some version of, obviously I'm not a lawyer, where it's like if their data is impacted in X, Y, or Z kind of way, you have to notify them within X, Y, or kind of, whatever time frame. Those are
Right.
explicit, almost like always. And because of that, you kind of have to ask yourself, well, how are we going to fulfill that? That
Right.
outcome is very specific. And there are some I've seen in previous company I was at, we had customers in financial services. They're not so shy. They have very specific requirements that say, do you have 24/7 kind of monitoring and response capability? What are you doing about this? There's a version of you have to determine like is what you're providing to your customer something where you don't handle sensitive data at all or it's not a critical service and you may be able to I think be reasonable, right? I think if they ask something of you that's unreasonable, but the bigger your customers are and the more regulated they are, those things will translate directly to requirements you have to fulfill. And either you're going to go build a huge team to go do that, or you're going to find a partner to kind of work with on that. You're
Got
going
it.
to want something.
Perfect. So you mentioned that you have spent a lot of time, you got into security a long time ago, and over a number of years, you have been part of other detection and response teams. What have you seen change in last 2, 3, 4 years, compared to like if you go back, good or bad, right? How have you seen it evolve or change in the last 3 years compared to how it was done 10 years ago?
Yeah. Good news, I guess what I've seen is there's a lot more tools. There's a lot more tools, open source, proprietary. There's been so much investment in the space. It used to be, and as you are well aware from your ArcSight days, it used to be like there's a few options,
Right.
you know. We don't have to name them. People have heard of them in the sim space, and then outside of that, it was kind of like there are little things in addition to that. But now there's so many options. We have so many ways. And during my time in one of my previous jobs, we lived through this kind of evolution where we kind of the assumption was like we'll just use one of the big kind of established sim platforms, and that's kind of it. And that will be the core of our detection and response capabilities. And as companies, and if you work in a company that builds a lot of software, you're going to find in something that's also changed over the last 10 years, you can't limit yourself to just pulling infrastructure logs and OS logs from window events and from Linux, logs. You have to look at what are you going to do in this gap between like the application, and a lot of the application and cloud resources are very much infrastructure like, and so much is orchestrated at the application layer. How are you going to monitor that? And do those platforms lend themselves well? And there's too many ways to solve this problem. And now I think the bad news is you have all the options in the world. You can go build your own sim. You can
Yeah.
go put it all into a database, you know, choose your flavor.
Right.
I think one of the challenges with this, though, that I haven't seen solved over the last 10 years is the number of people around for you to hire to
Right.
help you instrument, configure that
Right.
well. Uh, yeah, I feel like it hasn't even changed. It hasn't even grown. There's never enough people. The friends I have who are hardcore detection and response kind of that is their thing. They're constantly getting hired by different companies.
Right.
Um, and people can't get enough of them, but there's not enough of them going around. It's this intersection between like you have to engineer enough because this is not it can't be just a people thing. You have to build process around it. You have to automate. And, those people are not easy to hire, right? Because five other people are trying to hire them. But the tools I think is great is that like there's a lot more tools now for people at different sizes and scale. And you have to do the hard work though of figuring out, hey, what fits for my business for the type of technology we have.
That is a very interesting point because certainly the number of tools and how easily accessible and many of them cost effective, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you mentioned ArcSight back in the days, like, if you don't have $100,000 to spend on a SIM, you can't afford one, right? I remember 2007 days is like,
Uh,
it's just very expensive, heavy. The cost of SIM has gone down. There are even open source versions available. You can download Elastic, for example, and just run it on your own. I know many companies that have the talent to do it. Go do that way. But what has become harder over the years is finding the right talent to kind of put all of these pieces together. You need someone an expert in SIM, you need someone expert in detection engineering, someone in incident and alert triage investigation, incident response, threat hunting. By the time you have checked off all of the pieces, you're talking about 10, 15% team at the minimum to get a bare
yes.
basic 24/7 operation up and running. And that kind of is one of the reasons why. Have you seen that, you know, the have you seen that, bigger and bigger companies, one of the trends that uh, I wonder, based on my data points that I've seen, is that bigger and bigger companies are actually using more like, 2,000, 4,000, 5,000 person companies. And I know of even 90,000 person companies actually doing managed detection response. Yes, they have an in-house team, but they're still using a partner for doing the level one, level two kind of triage. Is that something you have also seen? Is that a trend directionally you have seen?
Yeah, no, I've definitely seen that because it just makes sense to get, I think, a partner who can focus on the volume and kind of breadth you need when you have 20,000 endpoints, when you have 50,000 endpoints. Your endpoints could include production servers, it could include user devices, it could, what have you. Um, because I found, at least like working at a company that builds tons and tons of software, like Expedia or the previous startup or the current startup I'm at, we have to reprioritize our resources and say, maybe we need to move people to application and product security, which is a little different. It's a very different kind of problem. It's very unique to the software that we build. Um, and we need to get partners who can scale for the things that, people are very much good experts at, have built this process, and it's kind of tried and true. I think for us, we have to pick our battles at the end of the day. Like, is the CEO invested in becoming innovative at detection and response for our company, or the CEO interested in like making sure like the company is secure, the product is secure, and have we solved that? And are we doing security by design in the application? Because that's the last mile, and that is customer facing. So, it's kind of a something that we're being held accountable for. And I think, look, for different teams, you need to ask yourself, like, what are you being held accountable for? Is the CEO invested in like becoming, is it a unique differentiator for your business? And it may be, I think, if depending on what you're selling, but to go staff up a 15-person team, you do the math.
And I think one of the things that I find is useful to think in this aspect is where you're investing all of these resources, how unique is it to you, right? If only 5% of it is unique, you can do the 5% yourself, but the 95%, somebody else could be doing it for hundreds of other companies, and it becomes more cost, a specialization of labor in some way for the undifferentiated heavy lifting that sometimes you have to do in security operations in different areas of it. So now, what would you say that even now, like after all of these evolution and things, and you mentioned one of the things around, talent, other than finding the talent, are there things that, you still find challenging when it comes to detection and response, and you're hoping that maybe in next 3 to 5 years, the industry as general, we being in the space, we're able to make a dent in those problems?
Yeah, I think one that I would pick out specifically that I hope to see kind of improve, hopefully, knock on wood, significantly over the next 3 to 5 years is high quality detections. So it's
Right.
sort of like not just the investigation, the triage, and the kind of analysis there, but even the detections that are available. And because so many businesses may use the same kind of technology. I am an AWS customer, you're an AWS customer. It should be easy. Like, oh, we use these kind of tools. I think it's still hard to see, and you know, getting the right detections that are going to catch the things that we're worried about. This is my favorite thing to ask my friends is like, who go invest in a sim and like get all their logs together. Like, what are you trying to catch? Like, what do
Right.
you want to catch? What are you looking for? What are you hoping to find, or what are you worried about? Um, and it's not a trick question. I think it's just like you have to build a program that makes sense for what you're trying to do. Let's face it, even at a big company, and even when I was at Expedia, we were well resourced, but we didn't have unlimited resources. We can't build a detection program to catch everything. You have to build a detection program to catch the things we're worried about for our threat model. And what I hope to see, though, is that there's some kind of it's easier and more democratization for all of us who are especially trying to secure businesses that have some amount of software development, which I think so many companies do. And even if you don't, so many are using cloud, so many are adopting other kind of off-site kind of not data center centric technology. We need we need like good detection there. We need to see like what that looks like. There's people who have, I think, long debates about this on Reddit and LinkedIn, but I just want to see that kind of get better. We have to find a different way to solve the talent problem basically.
That is such a great point because I think a lot of the out-of-box content that comes out in terms of detection rules and SIMs and whatnot, or what you can find on like publicly available Sigma rules and things of that nature, right, kind of just barely scratch the surface. And then there are companies that specialize, and we know of a couple of them, right, that specialize in building detection content. But those
Yeah.
are the rich 1% of the enterprises out there, right? It's not
Yes.
it's probably in the same place where SIM was 15 years ago. Is like, the
Yeah.
2,000 companies can afford them. They have it deployed. They can spend hundreds of thousands and even sometimes millions of dollars on detection engineering, but it has not become cost effective for 100, 200, 500-person company to have really high quality detection. I think that's an excellent, that thing could use more democratization, it could become much more cost effective. That's a great point. Now, we would be amiss if we didn't talk about AI. There is a gazillion amount of use cases, people, AI for security, security for AI. AI is there is a ton of potential. I think you'd agree with that. There is a ton of hype as well. How do you, what are you most excited about, at the intersection of AI, cybersecurity, security operations, detection response, in that vicinity? What gets you excited about?
I mean, the easy one is I just remember how mind-numbing the analysts, it was for analysts in the SOC and the IR team to deal with the kind of ultra tedious,
Yeah.
very manual processes that we had when it came to certain types of alerts and triage. Sure, there were some types that we had where it was easy to we had different ways to automate certain things, and then some we didn't, and it was just a painful process for the analysts. And I think one thing I am hopeful about is that all this talent out there who are working in security operations today can actually focus on the hard things. They can go look for those difficult things to find, uh, or they can go investigate those things that matter. We know no one ever has enough time, but so much of it is like looking at the backlog of 300 alerts from wherever. Is this alert even an alert? What is, and where is the rule going back to detection engineering? It's like, what even fired this off? Why are we even looking at this? Does anyone know?
Right.
Poor person there is looking at it. And if somebody's looking at it, they deserve to know that someone else is looking at the quality of the rule or the detection and what that content is. If it's out of date and it's still firing off and someone's investigating it, like, you're literally ruining their life. Like, I really hope to see that for the people who are in security, who haven't completely given up hope, that they can go work on. I think there are gnarly problems where it does require someone to really go kind of deep investigation, right? Where you're trying to do the analysis. Everyone knows what it is, where it's kind of like, hey, what happened? Did it happen? Where did
Yeah.
it happen? And I think focus on kind of, if we can get the intersection of AI, the advancements in kind of security technologies that we have to handle the voluminous kind of tasks, then I hope that people get to go work on the hard problems that they are best fit for, that we need.
Absolutely. I think, in this particular domain, right, the expertise around detection, you talked about detection earlier, you're talking about even the investigation and response playbooks around that. I see that there is so much need for skill set, right? There isn't one person who is an expert at how to do detection and response for 20 different log sources that an enterprise might have, or 20 different devices and applications they can have. So somehow kind of bringing all of that together and making it more cost effective. I think AI can play. I mean, one of the things that we are doing is we are trying to capture that expertise from human experts and kind of bring it in the form of an AI analyst. And the goal there is to make it much more cost effective. So that's a great application of AI to, again, make detection and response more affordable, more widespread, democratize it in a way. No, this has been a wonderful. I got to ask a ton of questions that I have always wanted to ask. So this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And for those who are watching this, if you have any questions or who are curious about what does detection and response as a service looks like, please do reach out to us. Happy to take some time and talk to you in more detail. Nick, thank you again for taking the time. This has been a fabulous conversation, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to do another one in the near future.
Likewise, thanks. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. Obviously, something I like to talk about and look forward to it. Have a good one.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Take care. Bye.